Hello, Mingjie students. Okay, welcome back. Continuing on with our Shakutsao discussion, okay? Now, a lot of times when we are working with these, we've touched upon this a little bit, when we're working with these liver pathologies, there can be some heart involvement, okay? So if we're working with the first stages of heart involvement, this is what, this is a combination that I would think to use. Okay, that'd be the Xiaoku with the Guangdong Hua, like that. Again, we have acrid and bitter. We're continuing with that theme, but with the addition of sweet. Okay, we've got some cold plus some warm. Okay, so it's depending on how we mix it, can be everywhere from cool to slightly warm, we would say, depending on how the proportions that we mix together here. Okay, we're not talking too much about emphasizing the gallbladder at this point. So in any case, we've got our liver stacked up. We've got the gallbladder and the lung. Well, we are talking about the gallbladder a little bit, right? Gallbladder and the lung in that tiger relationship, and gallbladder and heart is much more of one of our balanced relationships there, isn't it? Right? So when the heart is starting to get involved, which very frequently happens with that liver qi congestion, okay? We could also stack that up with this herb, which I like quite a bit, especially if we want to emphasize this neighbor relationship between the lung and the liver, which seems like a good idea since we've gone there so strongly already with the Guangdong Hua, right? This is the Zijing Niu. It's got but this herb has a bunch of different names. It's a good one, and I like it again because it's neutral and it's bitter and acrid, and it goes to the lung and the liver. Okay, so there's a lot of things we can do with this herb because of its neutrality. We can use it to help with that, with these lung liver pathologies, which are so very common in our culture. Why is it so common, right? Because the air that we're breathing is toxic a lot of the time, those of you who are city dwellers, and so the body is constantly having to deal with the toxins of urban environments. Okay, so that lung, liver, and plus being driven by technological society or industrial society, depending on where you're living, being driven by society puts a really strong pressure on both the lung and the liver systems. Both of those systems get challenged a lot, and so the thyroid gets challenged, and so we wind up working with liver lung pathologies quite a lot. Okay, this particular stack could also work very well with internal wind, okay, that the liver congestion might generate. And if that was going on even stronger, we can pare it down even farther and just really focus on the liver and that liver wind. Shakutsao plus Guangdong Hua plus Zijing Niu plus another one of my favorite herbs is Baiji Li. Love using this herb, okay, Baiji Li, to calm liver and extinguish wind. Again, we're still on this bitter acrid stacking that we're doing here, okay, but it simply enters the liver. You see it's slightly toxic. The Baiji Li is slightly toxic. That's very slightly. But we never use too much Baiji Li, just a little bit to help to relieve that liver wind. This herb I use very, very frequently And I wonder about it and the effects of herbs when they're grown in different locations. And the reason why I say that is because Mexican shamans say that the baiji leaf will instantly poison and kill whoever takes it. Um, so I suspect that the location of this herb might have a lot to do with that effect, um, unless the practitioner really is that powerful and they could use it in that way, which sometimes is the case when we're talking about Mexican shamans. So they might be synergizing it with some kind of special juju that they're doing. I'm not sure, but in any case, I remember back in the 90s when I was down in Mexico a lot and working with shamans down in Mexico a lot. And I told them that I use Baiji Li all the time. They thought that I was a very, very, very heavy duty kind of black magician because I use the Baiji Li all the time, right? And they're like, wow, really? And they were totally shocked. But I told them I did not use it to kill people. And so they were greatly relieved when they found that out. Mm. So I do not often use the Baiji Li to kill people, but I use it in fact to address liver wind that is creating different kinds of nerve problems. Okay, so that is a super, super golden tip for you guys on this one, using the Baiji Li for liver wind. So you're going to be combining it a lot with Bai Shao, maybe Tertiao if there's more of a heat condition. And it can be used for a lot of, I could say almost any condition where there's like nerve irritation, the liver's not supporting the nerves properly, something like that. I suspect also we'll be using the Baiji Li in the combination with the kava at some point, because some certain kind of similar ideas there with the kava. But again, I'll let you know as I discover more about that. Okay. Anyway, here's another herb that is very helpful for treating heart, liver, nervous imbalances. Not just the Baiji Li, which just hones in on the liver, right? But let's use this herb. Not the Shi Changpu, but the Shui Changpu. Like that. Heart and the liver. Heart and the liver right there. Okay. Okay, and so again, we're stacking up liver here in this combination. And we've got some synergies going with the large intestine. The gallbladder is not strongly emphasized except for with the heart and the liver. Yeah, right. Also introduction of the stomach and the spleen. So those heart, liver, nervous imbalances, we definitely can use it for that. But also if there are the person's just having a hard time keeping it together. That's the way I would describe it. If they're sort of losing it emotionally, that stomach addition of the stomach spleen will help to kind of consolidate them and pull them back in. So it's not really a heavy sedation that's happening here, but it's more of a harmonization that's happening between the heart and the liver there. Okay. Going into the tonify yang department, when would we tonify yang and use Xia Hu Cao at the same time? Well, this is kind of the idea that we were talking about before. Using the Xia Hu Cao to help to balance some of the yang rising effects that might be there in when we're using herbs such as Baji Tian or Shu Duan. Okay, so these herbs are really interesting. Both these Baji Tian, which goes more to the Chong channel, so it has a little bit more of a blood effect. Okay. In some ways, and Shudan has a little bit different effect. It's much more around the Dai channel and for the low back painish kind of things. Baji Tian is more to support the entire spine, I would say. It does that through the Chong in that way. So you might want to use a little bit of xiaokucao to mitigate any of the heating effects that might come from either these two herbs, the bajiqian or the shuduan. Okay. And the chung and the dai really send us over the falls for the liver and gallbladder tropisms here, right? Because the chung is more for the liver, the dai is more for the gallbladder. Okay. Okay, and the same is true also for dangui. People love using dangui so much. Again, we want to be more than a little careful in using that dangui. Don't just throw it willy-nilly into formulas, guys. Why? Because of the acrid and warm quality of the dangui, it can be very, very stimulating, okay? Although the sweet is definitely nourishing, somewhat consolidating. And the bitterness also should disperse some of that warmth, right? It does to some degree, but the aromatic quality of the dangui, right, is so deeply aromatic. Plus the acridity really makes it very, very activating. Plus the warmth makes dangui very, very activating, okay? So there's such a strong tendency that practitioners have to just want to throw dangui at patients to address blood deficiency, okay? And for non-Asian practitioners at female patients, okay, because there's this ridiculous myth that dangui is a women's herb, whatever that is supposed to mean. I know I've ranted about this in the past, so I won't do it too much here, but it's really a pet peeve because I see people get mistreated a lot. And you know, you see these women coming and they say, oh, they're getting treated with the woman's herb, you know, and they have this horrible malar flush that's going on. And it's because they're taking too much dangui, right? So just remember, dangui is a warm to very warm herb, and it's also active, okay? So it's going to drive the circulation in a very heaty way, okay? So unless that's really what your patient needs, it's kind of like almost like in the same department like chuanxiong, right? And so you have that those formulas that have the chuanxiong and the dangui mixed together. That's because they share a lot of those qualities. They're really trying to move the cold, stagnant blood, okay? All right? So unless that's really what your patient needs, believe me, you're asking for trouble if you give them dangui. So be careful, don't just throw it around. Much more often, blood deficiency comes with heat if it's not from extreme blood loss, okay? So just remember that blood deficiency much more often comes with heat, so be careful. Okay, so you want to get good at tonifying with those tonifying and cooling blood at the same time. You want to get good with those herbs, all right? Which again, we emphasized a lot before. Sangshen is the main one, and even Gojizu can be a little bit warm. Shouwu is a little bit warm, so that Sangshen is so important. And virtually any berries as well. So there are a lot of different berries that are available to us now, and so I highly recommend using those. Okay, all right. But again, we could use xiaokucao to mitigate some of dangui's heat. I think you're looking at that. Yeah. Okay, we could use the xiaokucao to mitigate some of dangui's heat for sure. And also to open the liver a little bit to help it to boot out the congestion and accept some tonification. Okay, so that's perfectly valid. Okay, so if you combine the two of them, you take a look, you're stacking up the liver. If we're just looking at the tropisms here, you're stacking up the liver for sure. You're not stacking the gallbladder there. Not stacking the gallbladder, huh? But the gallbladder will synergize with the heart, and the heart's going to also synergize with the spleen rather nicely. And the gallbladder is going to synergize with the dai rather nicely and emphasize that, all of that, okay? Just remember all those points on the dai channel that we needle anyway are on the gallbladder channel, right? So the heart and the gallbladder are very well supported in this combination, okay? So I think it could work out okay as using xiaokucao to balance some of that heat and the acridity of the dangui, even though they are both bitter and acrid. I think it could work pretty well for doing that. Also because the Xiaogucao is a very sort of light weed that grows everywhere, and the dongui is much heavier, kind of a root, like that. So tonifying the blood and the yin is most about bitter and sweet together. That happens very frequently. Okay, so the bitter acrid is like a flashing red sign. Okay, bitter and acrid, flashing red sign to pay close attention when you're thinking about using the dongui. Okay. Astringent herbs are about bitter and astringent, or bitter and sour. Okay, and sour and astringent herbs share some qualities. They're like that puckering quality, right? Emetic herbs are mostly acrid, bitter, and cold. So we want to keep that in mind when we're making the formula also. In general, we're going to be staying away from the emetic herbs. We're not going to be using them a whole lot. So just keep this in mind, right? When we're making our formulas, because any combination of herbs that gets too bitter and cold could become an emetic. Just remember that any combination of herbs that gets too bitter and too cold could become an emetic. All right, whether that's your intention to or not. So we can distill in by combining these qualities. We can wind up creating certain kinds of effects just by what we know that we have to be careful of. So bitter and cold can turn into an emetic. Remember, all those emetic herbs are bitter and cold, except for one of them, I think, which is hot. I'll look that up later, because that may not be 100% correct. But in general, the bitter and cold herbs are the emetics, okay, or vice versa, okay. Emetics are also considered to be toxic, okay, so we want to avoid using toxic herbs unless we really have to do it. Again, unless we're treating toxin with toxin, or unless no other herb will really do, we want to try to avoid the toxic herbs, and especially in today's legal environment, if you value your patient's life more than your own, right? Same thing applies to external application herbs, okay? So how important are Mingjie principles when we're making external formulas? I found them to be very important, actually. The coherency of our formulas works regardless of how the formulas are delivered or administered. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. You want to go for that coherency, even if you're using an herb topically. It'll make a big, big difference in the effectiveness of that topical formula, okay? All right, so I think we've gotten a very decent taste of what clear heat and purge fire can do. It's spanned maybe 2 or 3 classes here. So I want to ask, just to wrap up with clearing heat and purging fire, what have we learned from examining this category? So I want to invoke all of our unconscious memory of that. Okay, we'll do another clear heat, purge, fire meditation to finish off our study of this category. So close your eyes and imagine some different combinations of heat and fire that are attacking you from the outside. And ask yourself, what are the tools that we have to vanquish that heat and fire? Just let them come up. We've got a whole arsenal of tools to use. And let that go and imagine different combinations of heat and fire attacking you from the inside. And then recall those tools that we have to vanquish that heat and fire that comes from the inside. And then let that go. And imagine different combinations of heat and fire attacking from the outside and inside at the same time. And recall what the tools are that we have to vanquish that kind of heat and fire. And let all that get pushed out and resolved. And come back. Any further questions about this category of clearing heat and purging fire? It's a very useful, very important category. And makes a big difference knowing how to use these herbs when you're treating all kinds of strong illness. You can really work some very strong miracles, apparent miracles, when you're using these herbs to help people who are really sick. So don't forget that you can do them, okay? So we're going to take a little bit of a premature break here just because we're going to shift gears and go into our next category. So let's take a premature break and come back in 10 minutes, and then we're going to drive hard to the finish line, okay? All right, see you in a few minutes. Bye.